People think arranged marriages begin with celebrations and certainty. Mine began with silence and fear. Before we go any further, if real-life relationship stories speak to you, take a second to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. It really helps these stories reach the people who need them most. I was 27 when my parents told me they had found a match. Not asked, told. I still remember sitting on the edge of my bed that night, the fan rattling above me, my phone face down, my mind racing. I wasn't against marriage. I was against feeling like my life was being decided while I was still trying to figure myself out. I worked a modest job, barely enough to cover rent and send some money home. Every paycheck disappeared before I could breathe. Friends were moving forward, promotions, love, marriages, confidence, while I felt stuck, invisible, always almost there. At family gatherings, the questions came like clockwork. Why aren't you settled yet? What's wrong? The proposal felt less like hope and more like pressure. My mother sounded relieved. My father sounded tired. And me? I felt small. Afraid of choosing wrong. Afraid of disappointing everyone. Afraid that marriage wouldn't fix my struggles, it would only expose them. That night, I stared into the dark, wondering if this decision would save me or quietly break me. The first meeting was set for a Sunday afternoon. I ironed my shirt 3 times, not because it had wrinkles, but because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. My parents sat in the living room like judges, waiting for a verdict. The house smelled of tea and nervousness. When she walked in with her family, my heart dropped, not because she was intimidating, but because she looked calm. Too calm, like someone who had her life together. I kept thinking, what am I even offering here? A small salary, a rented apartment, a future full of question marks. We exchanged polite smiles, basic questions, forced laughter. Her father asked about my job. I answered honestly, and I saw it, just a flicker in his eyes. Doubt. My mother kicked me lightly under the table as if to say more. Impress them. But there was nothing extra to say. That night, my father said quietly, "This is a good family. Don't overthink." But overthinking was all I knew how to do. I lay awake, replaying every word I had said, every pause, every moment of silence. What if she said no? What if she said yes? Both terrified me. One meant rejection. The other meant responsibility I wasn't sure I could carry. Marriage suddenly felt less like companionship and more like a test I hadn't prepared for. A week later, the answer came. They are interested in moving forward. Everyone else smiled. I felt my chest tighten. Preparations started immediately. Dates, expectations, conversations about timelines and responsibilities. My mother talked about weddings like they were guaranteed happy endings. I nodded along, but inside, panic grew louder. I started noticing the cracks in my own life more clearly. The unpaid bills tucked into a drawer. The missed calls from my landlord. The way my coworkers talked about future plans while I calculated how much rice I could stretch till payday. I met her again, alone this time. She asked gentle questions about my goals, my fears. I wanted to sound confident, but the truth slipped out in pieces. "I'm still figuring things out," I said. "Some days, it feels like I'm running but not moving." She listened, didn't interrupt. That somehow made it worse. That night, I argued with my parents for the first time in years. "What if I fail her?" I asked. My mother snapped back. "Everyone struggles. Marriage isn't a reward for success." But I didn't feel like I was struggling forward. I felt stuck, being pushed into a future while still drowning in the present. And the fear wasn't loud anymore. It was quiet, constant, sitting right beside me. After the engagement was finalized, reality stopped knocking and started pounding. Every conversation turned into a reminder of what I wasn't ready for. Wedding expenses. Expectations. "Once you're married, you'll have to step up," relatives said casually, like it was a switch I could flip. At work, pressure followed me home. My supervisor hinted that promotions were for people with long-term stability. I worked longer hours, skipped lunches, stayed quiet in meetings, hoping effort alone would fix everything. Instead, mistakes crept in. Small ones at first, then bigger. One evening, I was called into the office and told my performance was slipping. On the way home, the city felt louder than usual. Horns, crowded buses, A world moving fast while I dragged myself through it. I checked my bank balance at a red light and laughed, short, bitter. It wasn't enough. Not even close. That night, she called. Asked how I was holding up. I said, fine. Then went silent. My ceiling fan hummed as seconds passed. Finally, she said softly, you don't have to pretend with me. I wanted to believe that. But the fear of being seen, truly seen, felt heavier than pretending. I ended the call early and sat in the dark, realizing I was about to start a marriage while already exhausted from surviving alone. The closer the wedding date came, the lonelier I felt. Friends stopped calling as much, assuming I was busy with happy things. Family expectations grew sharper. My father reminded me daily that responsibility was no longer optional. My mother worried constantly about money, about relatives, about what people would say. One night, an argument erupted over something small. A guest list. I raised my voice. My father went quiet. That silence hurt more than shouting. You're not a child anymore, he said. You don't get to be scared forever. But I was scared. Scared of failing as a husband. Scared of resenting her for a life I wasn't ready for. Scared that love, in this arrangement, might come too late. Sleep became shallow. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., mind racing, stomach tight. In those hours, doubts sounded like facts. What if this marriage becomes another burden? What if I disappoint everyone anyway? I stopped sharing these thoughts, smiled through meetings, nodded at family dinners. Inside, I felt like I was slowly disappearing, doing everything expected of me, yet losing the sense of who I was supposed to become. And the worst part, there was no disaster yet. Just a quiet, steady pressure, slowly bending me. A month before the wedding, everything felt fragile. One small push and it would all fall apart. At work, I was put on a short performance review. Not a warning, just a conversation, but it sounded like a countdown. We need consistency, my manager said, tapping his pen against the desk. I nodded, throat dry, already imagining the consequences. At home, expenses multiplied. Tailor bills, travel costs, small envelopes of cash handed out because it's tradition. Each payment felt like tearing another piece from an already thin safety net. I started skipping dinners, telling my mother I'd eaten outside. Hunger was easier than explaining numbers that didn't add up. Late one night, I sat on the balcony, city lights flickering below. My phone buzzed her name. I didn't answer right away. When I finally did, she said, "You've been distant." I exhaled slowly. I don't know how to be present when I feel like I'm failing everywhere. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm scared too. That surprised me. I'd assumed she was confident, prepared. Hearing fear in her voice cracked something open. But even then, I felt no relief. Just the weight of two anxious people walking toward a future neither fully understood. The exhaustion didn't arrive suddenly. It settled in quietly, like dust you don't notice until everything looks dull. I stopped reacting to stress because I had no energy left to panic. Mornings felt heavy. Nights stretched endlessly. One evening, after another long day, I sat alone in the bedroom, wedding clothes hanging on the door. Instead of excitement, I felt numb. Not hopeless, just drained. The constant fear had worn itself out. For the first time, a simple thought crossed my mind. Something has to change. Not in a dramatic way. Not a breakthrough. Just an awareness that surviving like this wasn't sustainable. I didn't know what to change. My job, my mindset, my expectations. The confusion was paralyzing. Every option carried risk. Doing nothing felt safer, even if it meant slowly breaking down. I thought about her, about the honesty in her voice when she admitted she was scared too. About how neither of us had chosen ease, only commitment. That thought lingered. There was no plan yet, no action, just a quiet moment of clarity buried under fear and hesitation. But for the first time in months, I stopped blaming the situation alone. I wondered, silently, what would happen if I stopped running from responsibility and faced it differently. The turning point didn't feel brave. It felt uncomfortable. I woke up one morning with the same worries, the same tight chest, but also a strange calm. Not hope, just acceptance that fear wasn't leaving on its own. On the bus to work, I finally admitted something to myself. Avoiding responsibility hadn't protected me. It had only delayed the pain. Marriage wasn't the problem. My silence was. That evening, I sat down with a notebook. No big dreams. No dramatic plans. Just facts. Income. Expenses. Weak areas. I stared at the numbers for a long time, heart racing. This was the risk, seeing reality clearly instead of hiding from it. I made a simple decision. I would stop pretending things were fine. I asked my manager for feedback instead of avoiding him. I looked for freelance work at night, even though I was exhausted. I talked to her honestly about money, fear, expectations. No promises, just truth. There was no guarantee this would work. I knew that. I could still fail, still disappoint people, still struggle. But choosing to try felt different from being pushed forward blindly. As the wedding day approached, uncertainty remained. But now, it came with preparation instead of denial. I wasn't confident. I was just willing to face whatever came next, eyes open. Marriage didn't magically fix anything. In the first months, it tested everything I was trying to build. We argued about money, about time, about expectations neither of us knew how to explain yet. Some nights, I lay awake wondering if I'd made things harder for both of us. I worked longer days, freelanced late into the night. There were weeks when nothing extra came through, and the effort felt pointless. Once, a client backed out after days of work. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, hands shaking with frustration. But small wins started appearing, quiet ones. A project paid on time. A compliment from my manager. A shared laugh after a hard day. We learned how to talk without attacking, how to pause instead of blame. She supported me in ways I hadn't expected, not by fixing things, but by standing beside me while I fixed them myself. When I doubted myself, she didn't push. She listened. Progress was slow, uneven. Some months were better. Others felt like setbacks. But momentum built, not in income alone, but in confidence. I wasn't surviving alone anymore. We were struggling forward together. And for the first time, effort didn't feel like desperation. It felt like direction. A year later, life didn't look perfect, but it looked real. We weren't wealthy. We still tracked expenses, still said no to things we couldn't afford, but the constant panic was gone. In its place was stability built slowly, deliberately. My performance review turned into a confirmation instead of a warning. Not a promotion, just security. The freelance work became consistent enough to breathe. More importantly, home no longer felt like another place to fail. It felt safe. Our marriage didn't succeed because it was arranged. It succeeded because we stopped treating fear like an enemy and started treating it like information. We learned how to communicate before resentment could grow. How to listen without preparing a defense. How to face pressure as a team. I realized something important. Readiness isn't the absence of struggle. It's the willingness to face it honestly. Marriage didn't rescue me from my problems. It forced me to grow into someone who could handle them. If you're standing at a similar crossroads, unsure, overwhelmed, feeling unprepared, know this. Growth often begins after commitment, not before it. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel for more real, human journeys. And leave a comment. What part of the story felt closest to your own life? Sometimes, success isn't about choosing the safest path. It's about choosing to walk forward, together, even when you're afraid.